some of the things that we talked about had to do with things that infect you. Bacteria, viruses, bacteria, parasites, funguses. These all can invade your body and give you a lot of trouble. All of these things are made up of proteins. All the cells in our bodies are made up of proteins. And because they're made up of proteins, one of the things that happens is that the human body recognizes these proteins, that they are alien to us, and it attaches, it tells the human body that it needs to attack it. These all have proteins on them that we call antigens, and the antigens will trigger the human body to create antibodies. It creates antibodies against those select antigens, and that is part of the immune system. It's one of the reasons why bacteria will have a difficult time taking hold in the human body. Same way with viruses, or in the same way with funguses. Actually, in the human body will create antibodies, and then the immune system, of course, will destroy them. After the first encounter, of course, anytime the antigen tries to invade the body, the antibodies are circulating to neutralize the threat. So you get chickenpox one time, you get mumps one time. You don't get multiple cases of chickenpox or the mumps. Measles, you usually get each type of measles one time. Unfortunately, there's 3 or 4 different types of measles, so you can get measles over and over again, but it's not actually the same virus the second time that you get it, or the first time that you get it. We can make people immune to diseases by vaccinating them against the antigen, and that's what all the vaccinations that Noah got early when he was a baby. We were vaccinating him against all the childhood illnesses. And what we actually are doing is we are giving you a dosage of dead antigen, but we're introducing the antigen into the body, and that way the antibodies are produced, and the antibodies will be there forever. So when we inoculate the child with the DPT shot, diphtheria, I can't remember what the DPT stands for. Anyway, when we're MMPI, or not the MMPI. Anyway, all of the childhood illnesses, and there's a number of them: measles, mumps, chickenpox, fifth disease is another example. They will not be able to reproduce in their bodies, and if they are ever introduced to the chickenpox or whatever, then they won't catch it. That's what we hope for every year when we are giving people flu shots. What we're hoping is that we are giving you the antibody against the antigen that is going to be the flu this year. But of course, we never know what the flu is going to look like until it actually hits. So we can't create a vaccination that will actually take care of that. The specific cells that are responsible for immunity are B lymphocytes that are produced in the bone marrow, and T lymphocytes that are produced in the thymus. These cells produce proteins called immunoglobulins that form the antibody that neutralizes the antigen. Once upon a time, I was working on an Air Force base. I was in the military at the time, and we had an outbreak of hepatitis B. And it started with the pilots. It was an Air Force base, and it started with the pilots, and the pilots gave it to their kids, and then it got into the daycare. And once it got into the daycare, it just spread like crazy. The pilots, of course, potentially had come in contact with hepatitis before, so there were only a few of them that came down with hepatitis. But all the kids got it. Every single one of them got it. And of course, anytime they played with another kid, then there was a possibility of contaminating that child, or infecting that child. I mean, contaminate, but infecting that child. So what we had to do, what we decided to do, what the base decided to do, was inoculate everybody against hepatitis. And what we did was give everybody an IgG shot, an immunoglobulin shot. So we had to give everybody a dosage of immunoglobulins. And that actually stopped the outbreak of hepatitis. And the reason it did is because we gave them a dosage of the immune substance that destroys, that would potentially neutralize the antigen. And that's exactly what happened. It stopped it right where it was. But we had to give everybody a shot, which was not a lot of fun, as you can imagine. So we're not only giving the adults shots, but we're also giving the kids shots. And actually, the kids were more susceptible to hepatitis than the adults were. If the adults had ever come in contact with hepatitis B, then we didn't have to worry about it. But we gave them shots anyway, just to boost their immune system. I became part of this because we had to draw blood from all the kids that were infected to make sure that it was only hepatitis B, that it wasn't something else. So that was not a lot of fun, if you can imagine, drawing blood from all those kids. When a B cell comes in contact with its antigen, it divides into two types of cells. It divides into plasma cells and then antibody-producing memory cells. So not only it produces plasma cells that take care of the problem right now, but it also produces antibody-producing memory cells. So this will stay in the system for the rest of the individual's life, these memory cells. The plasma cells take care of the problem right now. The antibody-producing memory cells will take care of the problem in the future. Plasma cells destroy the antigen and then die after a few days, and of course the memory cells are there for a lifetime. While B cells fight pathogens primarily with antibodies, humanity would have died a long time ago, the first time it came in contact with a virulent pathogen, if it weren't for the T cells. T cells attack pathogens without the need of an antibody. They eradicate new pathogens, and that's one of the deals with T cells. And that's one of the reasons why see, the biggest problem with HIV is that HIV infects the T cells. And since it infects the T cells, now we don't have these circulating killer cells wandering around killing new pathogens. So what happened with the individual suffering from AIDS, from HIV, was that they were killing off the T cells, and now all of a sudden these guys are coming down with really strange diseases that we had only seen in rare instances. Things like Kaposi sarcoma, pneumocystis pneumonia, extremely rare. The only time we saw them was a bubble boy kid, or if an individual was suffering from some kind of immune deficiency. It's the only time we saw them. But here, all of a sudden, boom, we have this explosion of Kaposi sarcoma, and we also had an explosion of pneumocystis pneumonia. And the problem with pneumocystis pneumonia is, you get it, you die. Because it has to be your immune system fighting this thing off. We can't give you anything to help you. So these guys are coming down with this disease, and they were dying. And it was like they were living for 3 days and then dying. And it was a shock to everybody, because everybody that came down with HIV died. And we'd never seen a disease like this before. Bubonic plague, it kills off 90% of the people that it infects, but we still have 10% of the people that don't die. But here we have HIV, and all of a sudden everybody dies. And this was a shock. So we had to figure out what the hell was going on. And at this stage, all this information is relatively new. All this information about T cells and B cells, this is all relatively new. We've only known this for about 30 or 40 years. And the reason is because we didn't start studying it until we realized that the HIV virus was infecting the T cell, and when it infected the T cell, it replaced the DNA, the individual's DNA with the virus's DNA, and made the T cell non-functional. So after that, since the AIDS epidemic has hit, we've done more and more research looking at T cells. We knew that they were there before, but we didn't really understand the whole process. until somebody finally broke it down looking at HIV. And since then, we have a lot more information about what's going on as far as the T cell is concerned. So if you think about it, of course, the T cell is there to fight off new diseases. So the probability is that if we're all infected with the Zika virus, relatively new virus that we haven't really seen before, and the reality is that if you live here at 7,200 feet, that you're not going to be infected with the Zika virus, because the Zika virus, the mosquito can't live above 5,000 feet. So everybody is safe here. If you wander down into Phoenix for the weekend, you get bitten by a mosquito, all of a sudden you got Zika virus. But it's the Zika virus, or it's the T cell that's killing off the Zika virus for you. You don't have to worry. Well, you do have to worry about it because your body has never seen this before. But the T cell, of course, is wandering around your body looking for new pathogens to kill. And that's one of the beauties of the T cell. One of the beauties of your immune system. Now, potentially, the T cell is kind of interesting because it will stay. You'll have a number of T cells in your spleen, and they'll just sit there, and they'll wait for something to happen. And then, as soon as something happens, then they will be injected out into your circulation, and now all of a sudden you fight off the disease. But I don't have a spleen, so potentially I've got all of these guys circulating all the time, and that's one of the reasons why I never get sick, because I have T cells all over the place that are circulating, and you guys don't. And the reason you don't is because they're being housed in your spleen, and you have spleens. T cells do this with three types of cells. There are cytotoxic cells. These are killer cells that attach to one type of antigen. Estimates are that killer cells can recognize at least 1 million pathogens, 1 million different types of protein. So they're wandering around looking for this type of protein. Helper T cells and suppressor T cells secrete chemical messengers called lymphokines, which work on other immune cells. Helper T cells wander the body looking for antigens. When they find them, they send out chemicals to attract other immune cells. They are inhibitory as well as excitatory in that they control the overzealous response to a pathogen. One of the problems that we have, especially females, because they have a stronger immune system than males, but one of the problems we have is that sometimes your immune system will attack your body. It'll attack certain things in your body. Lupus erythematosus is a good example. Types of arthritis are autoimmune diseases. These are things that can potentially happen to you, your own immune system attacking your body. But we have these suppressor T cells that are inhibitory, and they try to keep the body from attacking itself. This very rarely happens with males. Usually lupus is a disease that we hardly ever see in males, but we see it in females quite a bit. When a pathogen is able to establish itself within the body despite the activity of the immune system, a sickness response is triggered by the hypothalamus called the acute phase response. And this is actually what we're looking for. If we see the acute phase, then we know that the individual is infected. They can spread the virus. So if you have a cold and you're in your acute phase response and you sneeze, of course, all of your everything that you're sneezing out is infected. So we have to be very careful. One of the problems with mononucleosis is that your acute phase response is very difficult to determine. So if somebody has mononucleosis, they don't know it. It takes about a day for it to really kick in good. So one of the problems is they infect other individuals while they have mononucleosis, not knowing that they're sick yet. Of course, the next day, and everything goes south for this select individual. I used my bachelor's degree is from an all-male college, and one day a whole fraternity came down with mononucleosis. well, that sounds kind of strange. It's the kissing disease, and here all these guys came down with the kissing disease. Well, what had happened was they had a beer bash the day before, and they had a kegger, and somebody drank out of the kegger, out of the faucet of the kegger. He had mononucleosis and spread it throughout the rest of the fraternity. I know, it was crazy. It wasn't just those guys, though. It was all their girlfriends, too, came down with mononucleosis. So it was funny.
How did you do?
How did I do? I didn't go to the kegger. I don't drink beer. I think beer tastes like shit. So I don't like beer. I like things that are sweet. That's a good taste. Beer
Wine,
tastes like
wine, huh?
No, wine tastes like rotten fruit.
Yeah.
You know, have you ever taken an orange and bitten into it, and it tastes so good, and then you get the next orange and you peel it and you bite into it, and it's got a rotten place in it. That's what wine tastes like to me. Rotten fruit. Don't like it. I'm sorry. I guess there's something wrong with me. But I'll do it. You thought you were the only one? No, I like sweet things. Okay, so once you go into the acute phase, of course, now you're infective. You'll get a fever trying to fight off the disease. It's an inflammatory process is taking place. Your activity is reduced because you don't feel very good. You don't feel like eating, so your food intake is decreased. Your fluid intake is decreased as well because you really don't feel like drinking anything. And the interesting thing is that if you like drinking something, like I drink lemonade, obviously Sheldon likes Pepsi, but if he were sick, if he were sick right now and he drank that Pepsi, it would have a different flavor for him. I don't know if you've ever noticed that, but when you're sick, stuff doesn't taste good. It really doesn't. It changes everything in your body. So that's one of the reasons why. And that's, of course, if you drink water while you're sick, the water tastes funky. It tastes like there's something in it. It's really kind of weird. So.
I'll probably be sick here pretty soon. My son's sick right now.
Oh, your son's sick right now? So you're gonna get sick too?
Probably. Remember I was telling you I got that? I didn't get the flu shot last week, and I should have.
So does he have the flu?
Yeah, he has a fever. He got some to nurse yesterday at school, so I kept him home today.
Okay. So
Fever, coughing. Huh?
Is he home by himself?
No, his dad's watching him.
Okay. Good. Okay. Well, at least he's being taken care of, of course.
He's probably the acute phase, I'm guessing.
Good kid. So everything is changing, and of course Michelle's going to get sick pretty soon. And you can write a report about what the acute phase process is. All this, the fact that your water doesn't taste very good. You skipped a couple meals because you weren't really hungry. It's part of the inflammatory process. Strangely, your sensitivity to pain increases. So everything hurts, your joints hurt. If you've got any problems whatsoever, usually when if I get sick, one of the things that happens is I've always had really bad teeth. My gums will swell, which is not a very pleasant process. So if my gums swell up, I know that I'm not feeling very well, even though I might not be reacting to it in any other way. Disrupted memory consolidation, so your memory's not very good. Increased anxiety, and this is all part of the acute phase process. The acute phase response kicks in about an hour or two after the infection starts, after the infection hits. The brain is informed about the infection because of chemical messengers called cytokines. Pro-inflammatory cytokines accelerate inflammation. There are three substances that it produces. One is tumor necrosis factor. Does anybody know? Do either of you know what necrosis means? Necrosis. Death. So if you have necrotic tissue, it's dead tissue. Okay. So anytime you hear the word necrosis or necrotic, means something's dead. So the tumor necrosis factor is a substance that actually kills cancer. It's a cancer-killing substance. Tumor necrosis kills tumors. The other two pro-inflammatory cytokines of the inflammation process. Two other chemicals that it uses is interleukin-1 and interleukin-6. Interleukins, as I said before, we didn't really have a lot of information about the immune process until the HIV crisis occurred. And since then, we have been looking more and more into this. They've been breaking things down. And one of the things that we've discovered is that we can treat HIV with interleukin. Interleukin is one of the substances that we inject into people that have HIV. And now, of course, there's a number of them. We discovered that there were a number of them. I'm not exactly sure what the total number is, but it's somewhere it's 14 or 15. And each interleukin has its own number. It's 1 and 6 that actually work as far as the cytokines are concerned. Cytokines are produced by the first immune cells to arrive, and that is the macrophages are the ones that first arrive. And of course, the macrophages are relatively large cells, but a phage cell is something that engulfs something. So a macrophage is a cell that actually engulfs the bacteria, it engulfs the virus, it engulfs the cancer if it's a cancer. As curious as that is. Now, one of the problems with HIV is that, of course, the infected cells are T cells. So here we've got macrophages that are engulfing T cells. It's killing your immune system. It's destroying your immune system. You need T cells, and one of the ways we can tell if an individual is in an HIV crisis is by counting their T cells. How many T cells do they have? Normally you have a select number in your system, like 100 out of, you're looking at a cc of blood. You should have 100 in there. And if somebody's in an acute phase, then they may have 7 or 8, which means they can't fight off a disease because they don't have the T cell, which is the cell that circulates through your system, killing any antigen that comes across. Anything, it'll kill anything. And of course, these are non-functional as far as you're concerned if you have HIV, of course, because the T cell has had its DNA replaced by the HIV virus DNA. And that's one of the reasons that we look at T cells. So you've got a really serious problem here. One of the things that we can do with somebody with HIV is we can isolate them so that they won't come in contact with any strange diseases. But of course, in the beginning we were doing that and wasn't working. We had no way of treating them, and eventually they were dying. But now what we do is we send them home, tell them not to have anything to do with. If they have dogs, we tell them to get rid of the dogs. If they have cats, we tell them to get rid of the cats, because some dogs will carry strep throat. But they're carriers. Dogs are carriers, and the bacteria don't hurt the dogs, but they can carry them, and of course they can infect other individuals. Cats will do the same thing. They have different fungi that they carry in their feces, oddly enough. So if you have so one of the things we do is we tell them to go home, try to keep the house clean, get rid of your dogs, get rid of your cats, and don't let anybody come over, especially if they're sick. They can come over and take care of you if they're not sick, but if they are sick, they need to stay home and leave you alone. If cytokine production is blocked, the individual can have an infection that no acute phase response. They don't act sick. So this may be what's happening with select individuals. Their cytokines are not reacting to the situation. So the individual doesn't seem sick. They are actually infected, but they don't seem sick. Cytokines are actually too large to pass through the blood-brain barrier, so they send their message to the brain by attaching to receptor sites on the vagus nerve, which is really kind of fascinating if you think about it. So they can't get into the brain, so the only way they can tell the brain what's going on is by attaching themselves to the vagus nerve. And of course, the vagus nerve runs all the way down into your gut, from your brain to your gut. As soon as an ova is fertilized, so we're done talking about the immune system. Now we're going to talk about making babies. So we're going to talk about how babies are born. So once the egg is fertilized, the first thing that entity will become the two cells that are starting to are merging, and then they are reproducing. It becomes a zygote, and it will be a zygote as long as it is migrating down the fallopian tube and into the uterus. Once it implants itself into the uterus, it becomes it becomes another entity. But while it is until it has implanted itself, it is a zygote. And this takes about 2 weeks. All right. At this point, it is feeding itself. And the reason that they call it a zygote actually means yolk in Greek. And that's what it's living on. It will live on its own yolk for about 2 weeks. And then it will implant itself, and as soon as it implants itself on the uterine wall, it will tie into the mother's circulatory system. Okay, so the next thing it becomes is an embryo. It's a zygote first for the first 8 weeks, and then it will become an embryo. And this will be known as the embryonic stage. The first stage is known as the germinal stage because, well, that's pretty much what it is. It will stay an embryo until the 8th week, until it's 2 months old. At that stage, it becomes a fetus, and it will enter the fetal stage. A lot of stuff's taking place. A lot of stuff's being built at this time. It's very important in those first 2 months of pregnancy that the mother refrain from taking in any toxins because it can potentially affect the child. If she comes in contact with select toxins, it won't allow the head to form properly. The head, the skull, is actually formed in 2 halves, and the 2 halves have to merge in the middle. And if you stick your tongue up, there's a gap, there's a chunk of skin right there. Well, that chunk of skin was formed when the 2 halves of your head actually merged and became one. Now, as long as she is healthy and she's doing everything that she should be doing, then probably what will happen is that child will have a symmetric face. The left side will be the same as the right side. If she comes in contact with any toxins, one of the things that may potentially happen is that the palate will not grow together. And the lip won't grow together properly, and that's known as a cleft palate. The reason is because she came in contact with toxins of one ilk or another. It really all depends on what kind it was. But that's what's happening during the first 8 weeks. This is the embryonic stage. Johnny, I got you. I'll sign you in. Okay. Anyway, okay, so we're growing a baby here. We started off with a zygote, and then it became an embryo, and during the embryonic stage, it is just a mass of cells, and it grows into a structure that actually looks somewhat human. Not that human, but it looks somewhat human. But then it becomes a fetus after the 8th week, and it enters the fetal stage. A full-term pregnancy is 38 weeks. 38 weeks long. It's about 9 months, not quite 9 months. Anytime after the 35th week, we're okay. We can go ahead and let that baby be born. Sometimes the mother will have false labor. She'll go into false labor before the 35th week. We always try to stop it until the 35th week. As long as the baby has 35 weeks of gestation, then we know everything's going to be fine. We don't have to worry about the baby. Of course, there's always a possibility the baby will be born younger than that. We'll talk about that in a minute. Anything before the 35th week is known as preterm. Each sperm and ova will contain 23 chromosomes, so that after fertilization, the chromosomes will match up to create 23 pairs of, or 46 total chromosomes. And this is what they look like. This is what the human chromosomes look like As you can see, they're all different structures. They're all, well, in this case, they're all different colors. But they're all interesting. They're all different structures. This is a little boy, and we can tell it's a little boy because it's got a Y chromosome. It's sex chromosomes. It's got an X chromosome and a Y chromosome. The mother will, the ova will always contain an X chromosome. So if it's up to the mother, all babies would be female because that's all they have. All your ova.
So only 2X is a female?
Yeah, XX is a female. So, but the mother's ova will always contain an X chromosome. So she's looking for a little girl baby. It's up to the sperm to decide whether it's going to be an X or a Y. Now, one of the interesting things about X and Y chromosomes, you can see, as you can see, the Y chromosome is much smaller than the X chromosome. Much smaller. It's about a third the size of an X chromosome. So obviously there's something missing in males. I'm not exactly sure what it is. But we'll figure it out. Don't worry, we'll figure it out. Maybe that's what makes them so strange. So you get half your chromosomes from your mom, you get half your chromosomes from your dad. So 50% of all your chromosomes are male or from one of your parents, and 50% are from the other parents. So you can look at yourself. As a matter of fact, two brothers were inducted into the Hall of Fame when I was inducted into the Hall of Fame. One was 6'4", right-handed. Was a really good basketball player, really good runner. The other guy was left-handed, and he was only 6 feet tall. And he'd been hearing about his brother all of his life. It was a 6'4" guy that was the older brother. And the poor guy, you got to feel sorry for him because, I mean, he was being compared to this, this giant all of his life. He was only 6 feet, and the other guy was 6'4". But of course, you get what you get, You never know if you're going to look like your dad. You never know if you're going to look like your mom. I look like my dad. My mom was only 4'8". But my dad was 5'7", so I'm about the same height as my father. My facial structure is very similar to my father. I'm not sensitive to caffeine like my dad wasn't sensitive to caffeine. So you just never know what you're going to get from mom, and you never know what you're going to get from dad. Sometimes you'd rather get stuff from one or the other because it's a stronger thing. My dad has the ability to heal, had the ability to heal very rapidly, and that's a really nice thing to get from somebody. Because you get a cut on your finger and it's gone the next day. Yeah, that's kind of nice. So you're always hoping to get this or that or the other. My brother has glaucoma. Glaucoma's in my mother's side of the family. I don't have glaucoma. I'm real happy I don't have glaucoma. So, okay. Thanks, Dad. Not giving me, for keeping my mom from giving me glaucoma. My mom also had brown eyes and my dad had blue eyes. I don't know if that has to do with anything, but the kids that are similar to my mom all have brown eyes. It's not just in looks, it's the glaucoma, the sensitivity to caffeine. This is all from my mother's side of the family. Anyway, so we get half of our chromosomes from mom and half of them from dad. As you can see, this has 2 X chromosomes. This is a little girl. The last chromosome in the sequence is a chromosome that determines the biological gender of the child. As I said before, ova are always female. It's the male chromosome, the X or Y sperm, that will determine whether the child will be a male or a female. Each cell in the human body contains the same genetic fingerprint or deoxyribonucleic acid or DNA. Only the individual sex cells, the sperm of the males and the ova of the females, do not contain 46 chromosomes. That wouldn't work. If we had 46 chromosomes in each cell, in the sperm and in each ova, then of course that would be 92, and that wouldn't work at all. So we only have half, 23 and 23. And the interesting thing is you never know what the kid's going to pop out looking like. I have a brother with brown hair, and I've got a sister-in-law with brown hair, and they had made a baby, and that baby had the reddest hair you ever saw. Red hair, and she was tall. Neither one of them were tall. Now, where in the world did that come from? The mailman? Milkman? I don't know. No, of course it didn't. It came from, they were recessive traits that she developed. She also has all kinds of interesting problems. My mother's toes, the tendons in her toes would shorten, and if she didn't concentrate on keeping her foot flat, what would happen would be her toes would cross over each other. So it was, you know, when she went barefoot, if she went barefoot, she was okay. It's when she tried to put her foot in a shoe. You know, the shoe would force her toes together, and then her tendons would shorten, and her toes would start crossing each other. This is a real, I know it's a really kind of a strange situation. I don't have that problem, I think, after my dad. I've got huge feet.
Do traits come from like great-grandparents?
Oh yeah,
grandparents?
well that may be where the red hair came from. Could have come from the great-grandparents, could have come from, 5 generations back. That's where this red hair came from, that's where this red hair came from. You never know. But she's got the same problem. My niece has the same problem. Her tendons shorten. So in order to correct that, they had to go in and do surgery on her feet to lengthen her tendons and correct that. And of course, my mom lived with that all of her life. So if she wore shoes, which she didn't like doing, kind of a hillbilly. She tried to wear be barefoot all she could, but when she went out in public, of course, she had to wear shoes. And then, of course, the style, she couldn't wear she had to wear the style, right? I mean, you have to look good in order to, anyway, she'd put on high heel shoes, and all of a sudden, her toes would start crossing each other. And my niece had that problem, and had to have her tendons lengthened. As odd as that seems. Okay, so we've all got this deoxyribonucleic acid. Only the individual sex cell, okay, we already talked about that. So the sex cells only have 23 chromosomes apiece. Hopefully they do. If they only have 22, we got a problem. Or do we? Well, yeah, we do have a problem. There are some select genetic problems that can be created by not having enough chromosomes. Or maybe having too many chromosomes. If you remember, Down syndrome is trisomy 21. You have 21 chromosomes. You have an extra chromosome on the 21st pair. So there's an extra chromosome. So that individual, instead of having 23, had 24 chromosomes. Down syndrome is more prevalent in women who are older. Women are born with all the chromosomes, or with all the ova that they will ever have. And as they get older, some of the genetic material degenerates, gets older. Now this is a real worry for my family, because my daughter got pregnant at 42, which is kind of old. And so we were deathly afraid that something horrible was going to happen to the baby, that she was going to lose the pregnancy, that he's going to be born premature, that he was going to have Down syndrome. All of these were possibilities, and of course he was born perfect, so we didn't have that problem, but it was just blind luck. I mean, some people will have a Down syndrome child in their late 20s. Other individuals will wait until their 50s and have no problem getting pregnant with a viable child with no problem at all, without any problems at all. At the 2-week mark after fertilization, the zygote must implant on the uterine wall. If all factors aren't perfect, the zygote will not implant and be swept out of the uterus along with the menstrual flow. And this is something that potentially can happen, is the fact that the mother can have a spontaneous abortion. If everything isn't perfect, she probably will abort. Probably. Because it won't implant properly and she'll lose the pregnancy. And that's probably a good thing, because everything's not perfect and the baby wouldn't be born perfect. The reality is, if we look at all the sheep that we have seen born in our lives, and all the cows and all the dogs and all the cats and all the humans, the reality is there are very few that aren't perfect. You'll have a dog that gives birth to 12 puppies, and every damn single one of them is perfect. I've seen 100,000 babies being born, not being born, but after they were born. I worked in NICU units. They're almost all perfect. Probably 99.9% of them are perfect. You very rarely see any problems. I used to work at Children's Hospital in Omaha, and we got all the children that were born with problems in our hospital. Not just from Nebraska, but also from western Iowa. So we were getting everybody. Anybody that had a problem came to our hospital. And sometimes we'd be empty. We'd have no babies in our NICU unit. Sometimes we were full, but I mean, if you go to the nursery at the same time, the nursery's packed, full of perfect babies. And it was just every once in a while that we would see a problem. Usually the problem was caused because the mother did something stupid while she was pregnant. This was I was there in the 80s, in the early 80s, and snorting cocaine was real popular at that time. Cocaine really messes up fetuses. Smoking pot really can mess up a fetus. So we saw that. Heroin addiction really messes up a fetus, can potentially mess up a fetus. Okay. They have estimated that fewer than half of the zygotes implant properly on the uterine wall, and for that reason, the woman will lose her pregnancy. Despite the fact, whether she wants to be pregnant or not, about half of them do not implant. With the embryonic phase, the structure begins to look like a human being. The brain begins to develop. The head begins to form in the 4th week. A primitive heart begins to beat between the 4th and the 5th week. This is really kind of controversial because there are people out there that are saying that the baby's heart starts beating at 18 days. Well, the heart doesn't really develop until the 4th or 5th week. So this is what beating is not a heart. It's a cell that's beating, that's causing a heartbeat. That will become the heartbeat later on, but of course it's not the heart yet. By the 9th week, about 2 months, the embryo is 1 inch long and weighs about 1 gram. How much is 1 gram? Well, that's 0.3 ounces. So if you've got, well, that's liquid ounces. So if you know how much an ounce is, it's 3/100 of an ounce. So that's not very heavy at all. And this is after 2 months. This baby all of these cells have been replicating themselves for an extended period of time. The mother probably doesn't even have a baby bump yet. It hasn't even started pooching out. Her abdomen hasn't started pooching out yet. All the adult organs have formed except the sex organs, and the structure starts being called a fetus at 2 months. At this stage, as soon as the sex organs develop, we can do an ultrasound and we can determine the gender of the child. In the 9th week, sex organs develop, and if the fetus is male, the testes begin bathing the fetus with copious amounts of testosterone. And this is going to change the structure of the brain, oddly enough. Between the 4th and 6th month, the brain will increase in size by a factor of 6. So it's really important that between the 4th and the 6th month that the woman stay away from alcohol, that she stay away from marijuana, that she stay away from anything toxic, because this is when the brain is developing. And she can create a situation where the child will have a problem with memory and whatnot. Starting in the 4th month, brain cells will increase exponentially at the rate of 500,000 cells per minute. Babies have survived as young as 21 weeks, but viability normally begins about the 22nd week. We have been able to save a child that was born in the 20th week. I think it's like 20 weeks and 5 days or something. But that's a rarity. It almost never happens. My daughter and I were following her pregnancy, of course, and when she hit the 22nd week, we both celebrated because we knew that the baby was born. She was going to make it. That was quite a time. And of course, I was keeping my classes informed as to how my daughter was doing and what week she was in. I can remember the 18th week and then the 20th week, and finally she made it to the 22nd week. And after that, we knew that the baby was going to be okay. Each day of growth, and she also had a test done to determine if the child was going to have any problems like Down syndrome. You can do a blood test and determine if the baby has Down syndrome or if they have any neurological problems. Because normally what will happen is if the baby has a neurological problem, the spinal column will be open and will be leaking cerebrospinal fluid. So you can do an alpha-fetoprotein on the baby, and if it's low, it means that the child has Down syndrome, and if it's high, it means that the child has a neurological problem. And of course, we did an alpha-fetoprotein, and she was fine. The baby was perfect. Each day of growth within the womb during the last trimester increases the fetus's possibility of survival. So the later that we can leave the baby in the womb, the better off the baby is going to be, and the more developed the baby will be. Most traits are determined by many different genes, and this is known as polygenic. And this is one of the reasons why we can't point to a select gene and change it. We can't point to a select gene and say, this is the one that causes you to be addicted to heroin. We can't do that because there isn't just one gene. There's any number of genes. As a matter of fact, it may be in the hundreds of genes that add up to make this select problem. And this is known as polygenic. Almost all of your traits are polygenic. The genes that are expressed are the person's phenotype. So if we look around the room and we determine what color eyes you have, what your skin tone is, what your hair color is, the length of your fingers, the size of your feet, these all have to do with the phenotype. This is what you're expressing. So that is your phenotype. However, anytime you have something that's dominant and something that's recessive, you also have that recessive gene in there as well. And the recessive genes are the ones that are not expressed. But they're still there, and they still affect who you are and what's going to happen next, potentially. So we need to know what your genotype is as well. We sometimes need to know what your genotype is. Normally, if you don't have any problems throughout your life, if you never need a blood transfusion, if you never need an organ transplant, then you don't really have to worry about your genotype. But if you do need blood, and if you do need an organ transplant, then we need to know what your genotype is. We need to look at your genotype. So what is expressed is your phenotype. What is not expressed is your genotype. A person's genotype or unexpressed genes are only important when they are reproducing or when the individual needs to match their gene structure with someone else's tissue, as with a transplant or a transfusion. So the reality is, if my brother is going to get not upset by the fact that his daughter was redheaded, we needed to look at his genotype. And of course, my mother had, there were redheads in my mother's family. There were no redheads in my dad's family. But on the other side of the equation, the mother of the child also had redheaded genes back in her ancestry as well. So we knew that the genotypes had gotten together and created the red hair of this child. Most genes are non-additive. One gene is dominant over the other, and that is the trait that is expressed. However, there are some genes that are additive. In other words, the expressed traits are a combination of the genes so that one is not dominant over the other. Height, for example. So if you look at a family, you may have, well, Sheldon, is everybody in your family the same height?
Just about 6'2".
Are you 6'2"?
No, I have a brother that's 6'2". And then another one that's 6 foot. I'm 5'9".
You know what?
So 2 of them are in the 6 foot range,
Okay.
and the rest are all.
So how tall is your mom?
My mom's short, she's 5'5".
How tall is your
My
dad?
dad's about 5'7".
So where did 6'2" come from?
That's what we were saying one time, but the bloodline of my mom, her birth certificate says a fourth of something else, and then 3/4 of another. So,
Okay.
but my biological maternal grandpa, he's from New Mexico area.
And they're taller over there?
And they're taller.
Oh, is that right?
So I guess that's where it's coming from.
Okay. So you're the shorty in the family.
No,
You have sisters.
I have a brother that's shorter than me.
You have a brother that's
He's
shorter.
5'5".
5'5", just like your mom is 5'5". Okay. So one of the cool things about height is the fact that it's additive. So you don't have to look like your dad. You don't have to be the same height as your dad or your mom. You can be someplace in the middle, and that's just the way it works. Sometimes you get dominant genes from your mom or your dad, and that's why you're taller, or that's why you're short. And skin tone's the same way, which is kind of interesting, because if you look at somebody who is, when I was in the service, I had a friend that was he was African, of African descent, darkest person I've ever been around. He was literally black. He was almost as dark as Johnny's shirt. I mean, he was really that black. And he married this lady that had red hair. She had no skin tone whatsoever. I mean, she was so white, she was blue. It was that bad. I mean, it was the most amazing thing you ever saw. And they had, when I knew them, they had 4 kids. And all the kids were somewhere in between. None of them were white as she was. My God, she was transparent. And none of them were as dark as the dad. They were all somewhere in between. It was really kind of interesting. And that's why skin tone is additive. So if you get 2 people with different color of skin tone, like in the picture, we have an African gentleman and a lady that is Caucasian. You've got one kid that's white, and the other 2 look like they're somewhere in between. Really kind of fascinating. Father's the darkest person in the family, and he has 2 children that look like they have African descent. And then there's one kid that doesn't look African at all. While most genes are either expressed or unexpressed and are tied to dominance and recessiveness, some genetic structures are adaptive and can be expressed by conditions in the environment. The study of these genes is referred to as epigenetics. These genes can be influenced by such factors as nutrition, as the climate that you live in, the medical care or the lack of medicine that you get. Your economic situation can change what is expressed and what's not expressed. Your culture can dictate that you do this or you do something else. And of course that can change the genes that are expressed or the historical context. For example, I have a brother that went over to Vietnam and was sprayed with Agent Orange. And when he came back, he had lots and lots of problems. But none of them were genetic problems that we're aware of. But potentially they could be, because he's never reproduced. But he had a lot of skin problems from the Agent Orange. I had a friend whose, his wife's father was in Vietnam and was sprayed with Agent Orange, and it actually changed his genes to the extent that they've got some really interesting problems, some immune problems that come from the Agent Orange that he was sprayed with. Well, that's kind of historical context if you think about it. If he had never gone to war and had never been sprayed with Agent Orange, then the individual would have no genetic problems whatsoever. But because he does, his daughter has all kinds of interesting, or his granddaughter has all kinds of interesting genetic problems. And of course, they're trying to get the federal government to pony up some money to take care of her problems, but of course the federal government is saying you don't have any proof that it was the Agent Orange that caused the problems. Each DNA structure has extra genetic material that was previously thought to be excess and unnecessary material. They thought that it was junk. But geneticists have discovered that when methyl groups are added to this extra material, it changes the gene to either express or turn off the gene. It is thought that this is how humans have been able to adapt to different environmental stressors. And of course, that is what makes us as adaptive as we are. Epigenetics appears to come into play the strongest during the perinatal period, just before and just after birth. Thus, when infants are exposed to environmental stressors early in life, such as pollution or family conflicts, it may affect their reactions throughout their lives. Asthma is a good example of living in a polluted environment as an infant. If they do live in a polluted environment during their infancy, then potentially they'll come down with asthma. The other thing that can cause asthma is family conflict. So if mom and dad argue, especially when the child is an infant, then potentially the child will develop asthma. And guess when they have asthma attacks? Anytime an argument starts, all of a sudden the kid starts wheezing. I know. So it's a reaction to the environment that they're actually living in. As exciting or not exciting as that is. All right. Into chapter 3. This is the 4th week, and here I am starting on chapter 4. I know you guys are as impressed as I am. Oh, that's chapter 9. That I've been able to stay up with where I'm supposed to be. Okay, chapter 4 is deals with stress. We didn't even worry about stress until the 1930s, and then all of a sudden we started seeing people with all kinds of interesting problems coming out of the depression. So in the 1930s, we decided that we would start doing experiments looking at stress, trying to determine what was going on. And of course, then World War II occurred in the 1940s, and then in the 1950s, we had the nuclear buildup around the world, and of course, all this stress just started accumulating. In 1934, Hans Selye discovered that when under stress, most animals will react in a similar manner. This he referred to as the stress response. The body has a remarkably similar response to many different stressors. So despite the fact that it's one kind of stress or another kind of stress, actually your body's going to react exactly the same way. It really doesn't matter what it is. As long as the stress is there, the human body will react to it in a similar manner. Of course, stress can sometimes make you sick, so you have to be careful. I told you the story of my heart attack. I had my heart attack 10 days after I was fired, and that was very stressful for me. I'd never been fired before. This is something brand new. I've been teaching at that institution for 10 years, and then all of a sudden I got fired. Well, it wasn't really all of a sudden. I knew it was going to happen, but it did occur, and that's when I had my heart attack. So my heart attack has something to do with stress. Obviously, it had something to do with stress. A stressor is any event or situation that triggers coping adjustments in an individual. So the thing that has to happen is you have to react to it. If you react to the stressor, then of course it becomes very stressful. I was just in a meeting downstairs with everybody else in SBS. Sarah was there, Dr. Wolf was there, Marius was there, Christine was there, Dr. Haskey was there. We were all sitting there and they were talking about our budget. Well, it turns out that they cut our budget. And of course, some people were beating on the table and screaming, how can you possibly do this? And of course, I was just sitting there not reacting. It's like, I don't need money. What do I need money for? Doesn't really. As long as I got my camera, and as long as I got my projector, I can continue to teach without any problems whatsoever. So I wasn't stressed out, but there were some people that were really upset about these things. These things were supposed to be hiring another psychology instructor. I know that's exciting for all of you. It looks like we're going to put them out in Shiprock. If we can find this person and get them hired, we'll house them out in Shiprock, and they'll be teaching out of Shiprock. So that should be interesting. Not for those of you who are graduating, of course, you really don't care. We probably won't get them hired until next year, of course. But we budgeted to hire this guy, this individual. Could be a male, could be a female, who knows? Who knows what it's going to be? Could be somebody from Lithuania, I don't know. You never know who it's going to be. But of course, some people were really upset about what was going on, and I wasn't upset at all, because I've learned not to sweat the small stuff. And as far as I'm concerned, the budget for this department is really kind of, I don't have any control over it, so why the hell even worry about it, right? Doesn't that make sense? Why should I even care? Okay. I know, maybe I should. Sarah was just a little bit upset. Okay. But I thought she handled it really well. Stress is the process by which we perceive and respond to events that are perceived as harmful, threatening, or challenging. Before an event stresses us, we must read the event as threatening or even beyond our coping ability. So it's usually something that you have no control over. Okay. Thus, a stressful event isn't as much the event itself, but how we read the event. A stressor for one person may be a piece of cake for someone else. And during the meeting, of course, I'm just sitting there, not reacting to anything. And everybody goes, well, Bruce doesn't, he floats below the radar. And I was thinking, well, geez, why in the world get upset about something I have no control over? and they're just pounding the walls and shaking their fingers and getting all upset. I mean, I have no control over it, so why in the world would I react to it? So as far as that was concerned, they were stressing out and I was not caring. Short-lived events or events perceived as challenging can have a positive effect on us, like mobilizing our immune system to fight off infection and promoting health. So actually we need stress. We need stress to build up our immune systems, and that's fine. We need our immune systems to be as strong as they possibly can be. In the 1950s, Holmes and Rahe put together a list of significant life events by interviewing 5,000 people. They assigned each event life change units to demonstrate how much disruption or change took place with the event. Holmes and Rahe constructed the Social Readjustment Rating Scale, a measurement that attempts to quantify life events in terms of life change units. The SRRS was the first systematic effort to link stress and illness. The authors would add up the LCUs accumulated from life events and predict whether the individual was prone to a disease process in the coming months. So they would look at what was stressing you out at this point in your life, and they would try to determine if you were going to get sick. Research conducted on a naval crew found that the sailors with high LCUs were more prone to illness during their voyage than those with low LCUs. But the SRRS and other similar instruments did have their critics, unfortunately. Many of the items are vague and often subjective. They have subjective interpretation. Revision of personal habits, why would that be stressful? Assigning numbers to a select event doesn't take into account individual differences in event appraisal. The reality is we all handle things differently. So how in the world can we give something a select, how can we quantify it? For example, if you had to change jobs, that's a really stressful thing, changing jobs. Or if you had to move. How many times have you moved in your life, Johnny? Twice?
Yeah.
Michelle, how many times have you moved?
To different areas or the same?
Yeah, to different areas. I'm not talking about vacationing up in Montana.
I go back and forth every year.
I know you go
But
back and forth.
it's only 2 places, so it'd be 2 times.
So you've only lived in 2 different places?
Oh, in Phoenix, I guess 3.
Yeah, Phoenix, okay. Sure. And I moved 17 times. It's supposed to be really stressful to move. Sometimes I enjoy moving. I look forward to it. It's an adventure. If you see things as an adventure, it changes things. Changing jobs, wow, that's supposed to be highly stressful. But the reality is I've done it over and 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 over again. And it doesn't bother
How
me.
you cope with it makes it.
Yeah, well, I've learned to cope with it. So, yeah, it doesn't bother me at all. It bothered me to leave Montana. Really bothered me to leave Montana. But I went to a better job where I made more money. It was green then. It looked more like where I was born. So it wasn't that bad. And then that job disappeared. They closed the school. So I had to come down here. Well, if I were over in Shiprock, I'd probably be a lot more upset. Shiprock, the people who live in Shiprock live in trailers. And I live in a hogan. And I've got a fireplace. I've got a stove. And I can burn wood all the time. That's kind of nice. But it's green around here. I mean, if you look out the window, it's all pinon pine. That's kind of cool. But if you go to Shiprock, it's ugly brown. Chinley is the ugliest place I've ever been. Isn't it ugly? It's ugly. And it's, I don't know, it's like there's dust in the air all the time. And you drive through there, there's always this red dust floating in the air. I don't know. It's not the most attractive place I've ever been. And Shiprock is kind of a dusty place, but it's brown over there. It's red down in Chinley, but it's brown over in Shiprock. Not the prettiest places in the world.
So moving here is a lot more better because of the green.
Yeah, yeah. The air is clean. I'm sure it is. And, well, maybe, I don't know. Seems clean. Seems fairly clean to me. So it really all depends. I mean, on how many times you move. Now, you guys are both going to be going away to graduate school, right? Mm-hmm. And that ain't going to be in Salem or Chinley. It's going to be someplace else. Have you ever lived in Phoenix? You ever lived?
Not lived down there, but back and forth.
Living is different. Living is very different. I'll tell you what, people visit Japan and they think it's just the greatest place they've ever visited. But try living there for 4 or 5 months. Hi. Okay, thank you. Try living there. Japan is tough. The Japanese ain't the same as us. Them guys is different. They're really different. They don't mind standing right in your face. And they'll do it. They'll stand right in your face. And not think a thing about it. Because they live up here. And we live, I'm used to my personal space. This is as close as I want to get to you guys. I'm a little bit too close here, but I'm not going there.
Maybe that's why we're all back.
Yeah, exactly. You're all back here, so I feel more comfortable. Yeah. I know, it's really kind of interesting. Personal space does not exist in Japan. It's really kind of bizarre. And people get right in your face.
That's probably why a lot of Native Americans have kind of trouble going to school because they're going to an area that they don't know.
Right.
That would be interesting to do if they're researching.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So if you have to go to Flagstaff, to go to graduate school at NAU,
I don't want
or ASU, Phoenix, or Tempe, I guess it's a thing.
I don't think it'll be that stressful because, a lot of people are down there a lot.
Go to the University of Montana, it's a great place. You might enjoy it. Salish Cooper. Wait a minute, do they have a master's degree? I think they do.
In a tribal college?
It's a tribal college, sure.
I
That's
think
basically.
this is the first tribal college to offer bachelor's, so I don't think they would have master's.
Actually, it's not.
Oh, it's not?
No, Salish had one when I was still up in Montana.
Oh, I thought this was the first college.
Actually, we went up to Salish Cooten, or Sarah went up to Salish Cooten and talked to people up there before she started visiting. Interesting, isn't it? Okay, so life events. Sometimes they really get to you, and sometimes they don't. It all depends on who you are. The life event scale tend to lump all events together, whether positive or negative, and sometimes events will balance themselves, creating far less stress than predicted. Unexpected or uncontrollable events are much more stressful than planned events. Many inventories do not differentiate between resolved and resolved events. Life event scale tended to underestimate the stress on minorities because of their status. So it underestimates being a minority. We've done research and we've looked at these situations. We've looked at stressful events. In 1979, 3 Mile Island melted down and it contaminated the area with radiation. Well, what does radiation mean? Well, during the World War II, when we bombed Hiroshima and Nagasaki, it melted people. They died from the radiation poison. So here, all of a sudden, right outside of Pittsburgh, we've got 3 Mile Island, and it created a very stressful environment for most people. There were very few people that were actually affected by it, but the stress of having a nuclear power plant right next door to you that potentially was putting off radiation that would affect your children, this really was very stressful for people. The residents of the area suffered, they looked at the residents after a year, after 3 Mile Island actually melted down. And what they discovered was that they had excessively high blood pressure, they had high cortisol levels, which is the stress hormone. The stress hormones epinephrine and norepinephrine were very high as well. So these people were still under a great deal of stress. After the 9/11 terrorist attack on the Pentagon, middle surveys identified that 40% of the Pentagon staff were at high risk for PTSD, panic attacks, depression, generalized anxiety, and alcohol abuse. The Pentagon is huge. It's very, very large. Most of the people that were at the Pentagon didn't even know it was occurring, even though it took out a whole chunk of the building. But they didn't even know it was occurring because of the size of the building. But 40% of the individuals that were involved in that had PTSD, panic attacks, depression, generalized anxiety, and alcohol abuse, which is always a problem in the United States military. Statistics also showed that there was a statistically significant increase in the blood pressure among 4 large samples of patients hospitalized around the United States for 2 months after the attacks. People in Washington, D.C., of course, because Washington, D.C. was a target. New York, people in New York were a target as well. Of course, the Twin Towers went down. People in Chicago. Well, wait a minute, Chicago wasn't even attacked, so why should they be stressed out? People in Mississippi. Mississippi would never be a target. Who the hell cares about people in Mississippi? There's nothing down there. Why in the world would a terrorist attack Mississippi? There's nothing there. But people in Mississippi were still stressed out. People in Blaine County, Montana were stressed out. The Indians at Fort Belknap were just really beside themselves. They were afraid that they were going to have a terrorist attack. Now, who would attack the people of Fort Belknap? If you attack Blaine County, it's got 1.2 people per square mile. If you crash an airplane, you'd have to crash it for a long distance just to hit 3 people. You know, so it's not a target. Who's going to hit Blaine County, Montana? But they were still stressed out because of the attacks. Whoops, what's next? There was a significant increase in the symptoms of PTSD after the tsunami in Sri Lanka in 2004, and this is what it looked like. If you've never seen a tsunami, that's what I know. Yeah, those people are probably no longer with us. There was a significant increase in symptoms of PTSD after the levee broke in New Orleans during Hurricane Katrina in 2005. During the 2000 Intifada by Palestinians on the Gaza Strip, psychologists noted a sharp increase in anxiety, acute stress disorder, PTSD, depression, panic attacks. Children in the Gaza Strip had a surge in bedwetting, nightmares, and behavioral disorders. Well, here's another tsunami. This is the one that hit Japan. I don't know if you remember this one. This was in 2011. Here's the top of the wave. Here's the top of the building. Guess what happened next? Yeah, exactly. MRIs taken of Japanese university students before and after the 2011 earthquake showed that those who experienced the most symptoms of PTSD, intrusive memories, and heightened startle response had decreased brain volume in the region of the anterior cingulate cortex. So the more you were scared by the tsunami, the smaller your brain was. And these were university students. These were the brightest of the bright. And they had smaller anterior cingulate cortexes. And that's where it is. That's where the anterior cingulate cortex is, this yellow area right here. Daily hassles are the small irritations that don't mean much in the main scheme of things, but add up to be the most significant sources of stress. Daily uplifts are the positive things that happen to us that balance our daily hassles and help us survive from day to day. Hassles have proven to be a better predictor of health problems than major life events or the frequency of daily uplifts. So all these things add up. And it gets to you. Eventually it will get to you. Let me see if I can get it. Okay. And these are some of the daily hassles you can go through. You may be concerned about your weight, health of a family member, maybe somebody's sick, rising prices of common goods, home maintenance, too many things to do, misplacing or losing things. Do you guys lose things? Hell no. You never lose anything. Yard work or outside home maintenance, property investment or taxes, crime in your area. I don't know, is there very much crime around here? Is this something we need to worry about? Maybe not. Physical appearance. We're all getting older. I got news for you. As you get older, you get uglier. It's just the way the world works. I apologize. It's not my fault. I didn't have anything to do with it. I'm the ugliest one in the room, and I'm also the oldest one in the room. I know. I'm not the oldest one in the room. I'm not the ugliest one in the room. Don't stop pointing at Sheldon. That's not nice. He really wasn't. I was just teasing.
All right.
Relating well with your spouse or your lover. Relating well with friends. Completing a task. Feeling healthy. Getting enough sleep. Eating out. Meeting responsibility. How about eating out? Jeez, where do you have to go to eat out around here? You better. There's a gas station right over there. They got all kinds of stuff in there. I think. Don't they? I've never eaten there, but some people swear by it.
Have a deli in there.
Yeah, there you go. You buy potato chips. That's something to eat. My goodness, you can get all kinds of good stuff. Okay. Feeling healthy. This is really kind of interesting. The reason I walk up the stairs every day is I'm racing Sheldon for one thing. Have I convinced you to do it?
Yeah.
You did it for one?
I came up this one.
Oh, is that one?
This Saturday.
Okay. How did you feel? That's tired.
I'm still the same.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm 100 years old, man. I feel pretty damn good for 100 years old.
Don't mention the stairs.
Oh, are your knees bad?
Yeah,
Okay, I'm sorry.
I'm getting you.
You're getting there. I don't have an ACL in my left knee. I know. Lost in a softball game, bastard. Okay, so all of these things, some of them are good things and some of them are bad things. Everyday hassles or mundane irritants and stressors negatively affect physical and mental health to a degree that exceeds the adverse consequences of major life events. Compounding daily hassles can accumulate to cause worsening symptoms in people already suffering from illnesses such as lupus. And of course, that's the biggest problem. If you've already got a problem, all this stuff is going to cause you problems. They talk about being nibbled to death by minnows. And that's really what your hassles are. Hi, Joe, come on in. You can come in. That's okay. Okay. Yeah, it's a good point. That's, hey, Joe, are these gang signs? Is that what it is? Exactly, that's what I said. Okay. Being eaten to death by minnows, nibbled to death by minnows. Some researchers have suggested that select individuals may respond more negatively to daily hassles. Those high in anxiety to begin with, of course, they're going to react more negatively. Those who have trouble letting go to unattainable goals. People who have low social support. All of these individuals have more problems with daily hassles than anyone else. I found this picture. I had to put it up. I'm sorry. I apologize. A rabbit eating somebody's guts out. Oh, there you go. Rabbits, you better be careful. Many researchers have discovered that lacking social support can trigger stress more often than daily hassles. And this is one of the things you guys have to be really, this is something really positive. You've got these extensive family units, not just your brothers and sisters, but you have brother cousins and sister cousins, and you call your aunts and uncles your mothers and fathers. I mean, this is huge. If you look at my family, I had a mother and a father, but my aunts and uncles, they could care less about me. As a matter of fact, sometimes they wanted their kids to compete with me, so that they didn't really like me a whole lot because their kids were actually competing against me. So that's the kind of conflictual situation that my family situation had. It was really kind of a negative situation. And you guys, it's kind of cool because you have all these individuals that will give you a good time. Hi.
I'm not done yet, Sherry.
Oh, you won't?
No, that's
I'll
okay.
just sit here.
Okay. Keep me posted as to what time it is so that I know when I have to stop or get to stop or whatever.
So you got 3 minutes.
Really? It stops at 3? Does it stop at 3?
15.
Well, I'm over then. And that's somebody's fault. It can't possibly be my fault.
You have 3 minutes. It's almost 3.
Does it stop at 3?
No, she just lying. Rest time.
Thank God.
Yeah, on rest time. Okay. Well, I'll start here next time
All right.
with the
I'll be
rabbit.
back.
Yeah, take it easy, Sheldon. Oh, you're coming back. Well, bring Johnny with you. Okay. Okay. Wait a minute. Everybody was today. Okay. Oh, I gotta turn this thing off. Oh.